Welcome, everyone. Thanks for watching the Innovation Cafe, the last one of this year. We're very happy that Ceren joined us today to talk about regenerative food systems. I'm just going to actually check that I have my list of questions that I just wrote down. We're going to talk a little bit about, what you just talked about. Like I said, for everyone at home and that's watching us, you can join yourself with your questions as well by turning on your audio and just asking them to Ceren. So please do. We're very happy to include you in this Q&A. Ceren, thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed giving the presentation. And I was just wondering if you could give a very quick introduction of yourself, because you talked a very small bit about COP21, but I'm also interested in where you come from with your background.
I am originally a designer, but I also introduced myself as a beekeeper. I am coming from an industrial background, industrial design background, with a master's on human-centered design in the Umea Institute of Design in Sweden. Later, I worked in Sweden and in Boston, one of the design agencies in Boston called EHV Innovation. And finally, I found myself here in Eindhoven, working for Philips Design, working on healthcare products. And just recently, we have found a design agency called Code 21. I am one of the co-founders. We are 4 people, 4 creatives. And we are focusing on climate solutions, designing climate solutions and making them, making the solutions themselves attractive to increase the adaptation of these solutions.
And you mentioned, you specifically just said you're all creatives, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because you mentioned also in your talk, like, I'm not a food specialist, I'm a designer. And I was wondering, do you guys also work together with other sectors, so like the food specialists, to see what their input is in these questions, or is it mainly just your focus on the issues?
Well, as a starting point, it has started as my main focus on the issues, and also I have been witnessing some other issues related to the bees as well, because I'm also a beekeeper. But lately we have been also in contact with other people in the farming industry here in the agriculture in the Netherlands. So we have been also able to do a little bit of exchange of ideas in this area too. Yeah,
I can imagine it's kind of necessary almost to include these people in there if you want to make solutions, because otherwise you can't really.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very important to be also to also co-create solutions with the users and with people who are really involved in these areas. Yeah, and this is also what we've been doing as human-centered design,
making it really focusing on on the community basically. You gave a question from our audience. The co-farm looks like fork to farm strategy rather than the other way around. Do you think this is a good strategy to reach the consumers?
I'm not going to say if it's a good strategy or a bad strategy, but the idea for the co-farm was actually, well, there are different aspects on it. So one of them is how to increase carbon farming, but also how to help farmers who will be willing to change into carbon farming practices, as it's a very long, compared to industrial farming practices themselves, it's a longer term of investment. And how can we create this, how can we create support for these farmers who are willing to change into carbon farming practices, which means sequestering carbon from the atmosphere through farming itself, through the methods that you use in the agriculture. To be able to do that, we have noticed that it's important to to create a supporting system, a network of consumers and other farmers to be able to also help the starters and the bigger farms, the small farms, the starters, through the use of also the consumer support. And so it's, as I mentioned also in the presentation, farming itself has been pretty much dependent on the loans, bank loans and the government subsidies, and it hasn't been able to actually focus on it hasn't been able to support itself with its own produce. So how can we create a self-sustaining, self-supporting mechanism between the consumers and the farmers themselves? And the good way of doing that is actually closing them together, like bringing them closer to each other, instead of creating these connection between a farmer in Australia with a consumer in the Netherlands. Why not just creating these local farms and consumers becoming a collaborative support system? Yeah, and therefore, yes, it looks like fork to farm, and it is because it's very important to have the consumers involved in the creation of these foods. Yeah,
this was really like one of the main questions that I had as well. Like, it's really I mean, the consumer is like one of the main influencers in this whole process, I can imagine, because if they're not demanding it, then there's not really going to be then there's not going to be a change if they're not asking for change.
And we can also say that it's not only like bringing the consumers closer to the farm, but also bringing them both together to each other, like bringing them near and side by side, instead of splitting them apart with all these different hands within the chain. Like instead of having all these middlemen inside, in between, why not just creating this direct connection between the farmers and the consumers themselves? And creating also these distribution channels and letting the consumers solve and sort out the distribution channels themselves, so that the farmer also only has the time to focus on the motivational part of the job, which is just producing the food.
Tatiana, you had a question, I think. Do you want to turn on your microphone and ask your question?
Yes, sure. And Ceren, thank you very much for a very inspiring talk, and how you highlighted some of the problems in the food supply chain that we currently have. And I was wondering, because the solution that you are describing, in order to enable that, it needs to be bridged, I would think, until we can reach that point, that this element that you want to enable could be achieved. And I thought, so in the current ecosystem, of course, there is already quite a lot of knowledge about and efficiency also have been achieved with the current logistics organized around the supermarket chains. So do you see a role, and maybe in a certain transition period, that those existing players could be become also players supporting the conceptual solution that you described?
It's a very great question. Thank you, Tatiana, and also thank you for watching. Yeah, I think what's very important, what I really wanted to make sure that I was able to give out as a message, was that yes, we use the precision, and also we use the precision engineering and precision designing tools to create the efficiency, and we've been focusing on also cost expenditures. But at the same time, the importance is that we need to step back when we really feel like it's been a wrong investment, or when we feel like the investment hasn't turned out well. So it's important to drop sometimes the investments before it's too late. So in that sense, we need to be flexible, and being flexible would mean actually not to be really also creating these closed communities, which are kind of like not able to open to themselves to other participants or to other editions. So in that sense, I can imagine if a community becomes flexible and able to also understand when to drop an idea or when to pursue a new fresh ideas, they would be able to also involve these supermarket channels or other retail channels into their distribution channels, into their distribution and also production chain. And one good example I saw, for example, I heard in the news related to again the food supply chains problem during the pandemic era. For example, one of the restaurants that was closed in California had been organizing home deliveries of fresh produce, fresh farm produce, which was being delivered actually by farms to this restaurant. So instead of looking at the system or looking at their business as a production business or food production business, they looked at it as a kind of a transfer of, they served as a transfer of food, local farm food to other people who have been their customers for long. So again, being flexible and being able to orient yourself within a system so that you still achieve less waste, I think is more important. Yeah.
Thank you, Ceren.
Yeah, thank you too.
We have a comment from Ernst. He's mentioning, oh, I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing this right. I'm a bit confused about the CO2 sequestration claim. CO2 emission might be reduced by optimizing the process, but the plants are meant for consumption, so the CO2 is released again. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because I didn't make it clear in my presentation how carbon farming actually is achieved. And that's a really good point. Maybe I should do that next time. So carbon farming is a way of farming using different plantations. Like, for example, instead of annual plantations, there's a mix of annuals with perennials, meaning like every 2 years or every multiple years plants. Use of this type of different vegetations enable the farm to sequester more carbon in time. If you're only making your farm work for annual produce, of course, what Ernst is saying is true, like whatever you have been sequestering over the year is already consumed again, and there's not much carbon being sequestered. Although it's still there will be still some amount of carbon sequestered if you're not tilling meaning like destroying and opening the soil apart, because when you open and damage the soil, actually you're damaging also the microorganisms within the soil. Thus you're also damaging the ability of the soil to capture carbon from the atmosphere. So it's important it's a little bit of work on the soil and enabling the biodiversity within the soil itself, enabling also the cover crops to grow further and covering the soil itself so that there's not much also water reduction. But also by organizing, by making an arrangement of different vegetation from annual to perennial, and also the trees, the bigger trees, the bush fruits, all of these mixtures would enable a better carbon sequestration. I hope I answered it well.
I hope so too. Ernst, are you happy with that answer? I don't know if you can. No response, but I'm assuming no answer is a good one. Aaron says he would be interested in details, but let's move on for now. So okay. Maybe you guys can continue about this a little bit later.
Yeah. I would be happy to share some links as well.
Yeah. Another question, do you see opportunities from a design perspective in vegan and vegetarian food, such as the Impossible Burger?
That's a tough question. Because everything that is highly industrialized would always, well, it's my opinion, of course, but we always risk ourselves, we always risk backing ourselves into a corner. And again, we also, a very good example to that is also the bioplastics. For example, we were discussing with one of my colleagues in Code 21, how bioplastics are also using corn and make it justifiable, making monoculture justifiable. So as long as we don't drive ourselves to monoculture, and again, these heavy industrial methods of agriculture, why not Impossible Burgers? But we have to be careful about, again, the size of the growth here, what we're really doing. It's again a processed food, but then as long as we keep it within the local farm or local community area, or reducing the carbon emissions while producing it, why not? Yeah.
But doesn't overpopulation come into play in this as well? Because I mean, industrialization happened because we are growing as a society. Like, how does that come into play?
That's also a good question, because now that we have already grown up as society, as big cities, how do we can't really expect also people to move from cities to places, small places, and then start their own farms. That's also kind of like a time frame look to it. But I think I will say it's an opportunity, but at the same time, we still need to make sure that we're not creating a big, let's say, a big factory, which is built on top of an agricultural land, and then completely taking us away from producing our fresh food, but just producing the ingredients to make an Impossible Burger. So again, we have to be careful with the whole entire infrastructure being built here.
It's almost like we have to almost start from scratch again to really be able to do this properly.
Yeah.
Which is also the I guess the main challenge, because there's already so much emotion, and like you can't just put a halt to everything.
That's also true. But I would also say again, yeah, it's important also to drop an investment once we see that it's not working well. Otherwise, we keep on justifying it and just dragging it through our lives, and then it just continues messing our planet.
Yeah. We got a comment/question from Hans. Your interesting introduction reminded me of the Matrix YouTube film, very clear. I was also reminded of the beehive population. There are always too many bees, so that in times of trouble they can help. So lean but also effective. Would you agree that effectiveness comes before efficiency?
Yes, I think so. Because I also have been being a beekeeper, I have also seen that bees, for bees also, it's not that important how efficient they are. Sometimes they just kill themselves or work themselves to death, actually. But the more important thing is the effectiveness, like what Hans is saying. And it's, I have seen bees also spending days and hours to just treat their own colony, and sometimes not necessarily being successful in doing that. And then but if they were efficient, if they had been efficient, they would have just given up from the very beginning. But what happens is, when I see them working hard to revive their colony, I also provide help from outside. So then again, trying for the effectiveness also would bring other outsourced helps.
Oh, thank you. I asked this question especially because flexibility, I think, is higher up the higher hierarchy. So you first have to be effective, doing the right things. And then you can do the right things very well, which is efficiency. And then you can become flexible in doing the right things tomorrow. What would you say about that?
I would say then we would add also a learning into that loop. We would learn from our effective moves and then the efficiency outcome, and then with that learning we would apply new learnings into it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's also the main idea behind the Japanese approach of lean business. I mean, most Dutchmen think that you just have enough people very efficiently, but it really means that there are more people who can work in different places when they are needed. And I think that in the marketplace for your farms, that would be a very good idea too, isn't it?
Yeah. And lean also requires observation skills and of
Yes.
everyone. It relies on everyone's attendance and observation skills. So again, it's about observing what needs to be done, when to also decide when to intervene, and then intervene within that system. And that would achieve, of course, efficiency in the end, but also would bring about flexibility.
Okay, thank you. Have you also been reading about the one straw revolution?
No, I haven't. Would you be
that
able
might
to
be
share
might
with
be
us?
interesting for you. That was started some 60 years ago by a Japanese. He farms in a way which is absolutely without any products added, pesticides or any way. He even doesn't plow the land, and he doesn't give it manure. It's completely self-sufficient. So it might be an interesting thing for you. Thank you.
One straw.
One straw revolution.
Okay.
There's a lot to be found about that on the internet, of course.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I will look into it.
Thanks for that contribution, Hans. I don't think we have any other questions from our audience. I just want to ask one last question, or like maybe one or two. I have to double check how the time is going. But I was wondering if you can, because in the app you were focusing on really local produce, local communities, right? How do you see that working? For example, if you go to the supermarket now, like there's fruits from all over the world, how would you see that working within a system like that? Is that still possible?
Yeah, I have my own, of course, observations and my own thoughts on that. So I'm not going to say this is right or this is wrong, but my observation is that as humans, we need connectedness and being connected to a whole. And what I see with the observation and all these supply shelves in supermarkets, it disconnects us from the source of food, and the idea of food has become something presentable on a shelf by itself, completely disconnected from where it is coming from, how it is being produced, who has brought that food resource to that shelf, who has even lined it up on that shelf. We don't even pay attention. We just are very much used to just going there, grabbing what we need, and we are very much actually also again efficiency focused. Like I have a recipe for something, and then I just go there and then just grab whatever I need. And it's in time, the danger in it is that in time it creates a kind of a problem of being disconnected also from our own food. Like what am I cooking today? What am I going to use today? It's a kind of creates a bigger problem with it. So therefore, again, co-farm is an idea, but the idea is coming from how can we create this connectedness with a whole, where I feel like, or where one can feel like they are all collectively working for one purpose, one shared goal, and that is about the collectivity and the collective work towards one goal. And that is, I think, one of the biggest rewards for human being and for the brain. And it is true, actually, because there are some research done on brain activity, and they have found out that when people work towards a goal together, when they collaborate together, when they team up together, it lights up the rewarding area on the brain. Something like you're having maybe a kind of a drug effect. So you're getting a collective and collaboration high from that activity. I think it's important to keep that joy in our lives, and that's why I was paying more attention to that connectedness in the app.
Fair enough. I guess it's also like, I mean, is the app, is that meant more as a concept, or is it as a...
It is a concept for now.
Yeah, it's not really meant to be developed right now.
Yeah, exactly. So what we were really trying to do in Code 21 was trying to show people that solutions for the climate crisis doesn't have to be really boring, and really also like a very scientific approach. There are things that we can still do which work for people, which work for the communities, which work for also the joy itself and bring motivation in life, in people's life.
Then I have one last question for you from our audience. Have you any ideas about introducing this approach into schools with the comment that education is the place where the future is made?
That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be really nice, because also this, in schools we also learn how to listen to each other, how to be flexible in life, and also how to solve problems all together. And it all starts there. And just lately, I just listened to a speech by Simon Sinek. He was mentioning that school is not actually important for giving the education itself, but it's important to teach people how to connect with others and how to create this, again, the community. Yeah.
Great. Then I think we've gone through most of our questions. So if there's no more questions from our audience, then I'm just gonna give it like a few seconds to see if someone wants to quickly pop up their hand or type something in the chat. I don't think so. If not, then I really want to thank you for your time and answering all the questions, and also to thank the audience for joining us today. It was really interesting, and I think we could continue talking about this for a very long time if we wanted to, but perhaps we can do that in the new year. As I mentioned, this was our last Innovation Cafe for this year, but we will be back on the 14th of January, so we really hope that everyone else that's watching now will be back then. And you can keep an eye on our website also to rewatch this Q&A if you want, or rewatch the talk. If you want to get in contact to talk about this more, you're very welcome to contact us. And yeah, keep an eye on the website, ehvinnovationcafe.org, for our upcoming program. So for now, thank you everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much for your questions and also your ideas as well.